My name is Karen Harrison. I own City Liquors in Fort Pierce. City Liquors is a suite-style boarding and lifetime caregiver home for dogs. The Lifetime Caregiver program is for trust dogs. Dogs come to City Liquors to live out their life when their owners have either passed away or have become incapacitated. The dogs come with a pet trust and a trust fund. That's what I'd like to talk about: estate planning for your pets and what a pet trust is. It's been estimated that 500,000 pets are euthanized annually due to their owners passing away or becoming incapacitated. I was at the St. Lucie County Humane Society looking at dogs, and I came to this one yellow lab in a cage who wouldn't even lift her head and look at me. She was 9 years old, and the sign on her cage said, "My owners had to go to a nursing home." This sad situation could have been prevented simply by including your pets in with the estate planning process. There are a couple ways of doing this. The more traditional way has been to put a provision in your will. However, the new way is to do a statutory pet trust. Whichever way you decide to go, I recommend you work with a qualified estate planning attorney, as there are some major differences between the two, and I'm going to go over some of those differences. A will becomes effective upon death. A trust becomes effective upon its creation. Therefore, a will only leave instructions as to what to do with your pets once you have passed away. It does not take into consideration the incapacitation stage of your life. The trust does both death and incapacitation. So, with a will, this usually means that your power of attorney has the burden of deciding what to do with your pets during your incapacitation. This is usually when pets are taken to the vet to be conveniently euthanized, or taken to the Humane Society for a chance of being adopted out. Wills have to be probated. A trust does not. Probation can take weeks, months, or years. This can create a time delay before funding can be made available for your pets. Because a will is probated, it becomes public record. Many people do not want it made public that they left $100,000 to their pet. Since a trust is not probated, it can remain relatively private. A will does not have a checks and balances system in place. A trust does. For example, say you leave $100,000 in your will to a caregiver to take care of your bird. Usually what happens is the caregiver receives all the funds up front. Then, sometimes what happens is shortly thereafter the bird mysteriously dies. Then rumors circulate that the caregiver killed the bird and made off with the money. This type of situation can and does happen with the will situation. The will did its job by distributing the property of the deceased person. Pets are considered property. The will distributed the cash and the bird. You can request in your will that the money be used for the care of the bird, but you cannot direct that it be used for the care of that bird. A pet trust has a great checks and balances system in place. When you create a trust, you have what's called a trustee. The trustee is responsible for managing the trust, managing the trust funds, and overseeing the caregiver. In the example of the bird, the caregiver does not receive the $100,000 up front, but rather receives periodic payments. The condition of payment is that they must be taking good care of your pet. If they are not, the trustee can remove the pets from the caregiver and place them with your second choice of a caregiver. So the pet trust has a great checks and balances system in place, because you have a trustee overseeing the pet's well-being, and you have a caregiver with great incentive to keep the pet alive in order to continue receiving payments. Now, why would anyone do a will versus a trust? Well, the will can be less expensive because it's just a provision in the will, and it will cost whatever it costs to prepare a will. The trust document may cost more to prepare, but you now have a trustee who enters the picture and needs to be paid for managing the trust. However, if there is any substantial amount of money involved and you are really concerned about the well-being of your pet, you will do a pet trust, and here's a story why. This is a headstone for Mr. Hans Susskind. Mr. Susskind left $250,000 to an animal shelter for the care of cats. That very same animal shelter euthanized Mr. Susskind's very own 30 cats, and here's the story. Mr. Susskind was a Holocaust survivor. He ended up in Indianapolis, here in the United States. He was a door-to-door salesman. Mr. Susskind never married, and he never had children, but he had one cat. When Mr. Susskind retired, he moved to Okeechobee, Florida. His one cat turned into 30 cats. Mr. Susskind got elderly and had to go into a nursing home. While in the nursing home, the caretaker for his property called animal control for the cats. Animal control came, picked the cats up, and took them to the animal shelter, where they were ultimately euthanized. Now, the caretaker was not to blame, and the animal shelter was not to blame. Mr. Susskind only had a will. Mr. Susskind had not passed away yet. He had only become incapacitated. No one knew of his intentions to leave money for the care of cats, because his will had not been read, because Mr. Susskind had not died. Now, this sad situation could have been prevented by preparing a pet trust versus a will. However, I'm glad to see that Mr. Susskind got a really nice headstone out of the deal. It's about 4 feet high. It's very unusual, and if you're ever in Okeechobee, it's at the Evergreen Cemetery. Stop in and take a look at it. Funding your trust. You do have to fund the trust. Some of you may be thinking you have to be very wealthy to leave money for your pets. However, that is not necessarily true. Many trust funds are funded with a life insurance policy, and a pet trust is no different. Life insurance policies may even have some creditor protection and estate planning advantages. Keep in mind that a life insurance policy only pays out upon death. You will still need to fund the trust for the incapacitation stage of your life. Now, you can fund the trust with cash on hand. However, even though you have cash, you may still want to use a life insurance policy. Now, if you are not healthy enough for a life insurance policy or wealthy enough to fund the trust with cash, you may have to title some of your assets in the name of the trust. Once you become incapacitated or have passed away, these assets can be sold to fund the trust. Now, keep in mind that some of those assets need to be fairly liquid so that cash can be made readily available for the care of your pets. The caregiver is the person who has the daily hands-on responsibility of caring for your pet. I recommend you list at least 3 caregivers. This is in case something happens to the first caregiver. The trustee can place your pets with your second choice of a caregiver. Have a conversation with your caregiver and make sure they want to take this task on and that the money you're leaving them is sufficient. Don't assume that your family members are going to take your pets in. Many times, they are the ones taking them to the vet to be euthanized or to the Humane Society. If you do not have someone to leave your pets to, you may have to turn to someone like City Lickers, who does this for a profession. Hopefully, I've given you enough information so that if you are a pet owner, you can decide if your pet is worthy of a trust. If you are an estate planning attorney listening to this PowerPoint presentation, I hope you will make it a routine practice to ask your clients, do you have pets, and how would you like to provide for their long-term care? If you are a banker with a trust department, I hope you will consider adding pet trust to your list of services that you offer. And if you are an insurance agent, you too can discuss pet trust with your clients. And hopefully, if we all work together to create awareness of what a pet trust is, we can save some of these animals who end up in bad situations. Before I close, I'd like to thank two dogs and their owners. They are the reason I'm here today creating awareness of the need to include your pets in with your estate planning, and the reason why I created the Lifetime Caregiver program at City Liquors. This is Blackie and her owner, Mrs. Pauline Bogart. Mrs. Bogart passed away and Blackie was going to be euthanized. Although I did not have my Lifetime Caregiver program, out of the goodness of my heart, I took Blackie. Blackie flew home with me from Alabama to Florida. When she arrived in Florida, I put sunglasses on her and put her in a lounge chair around the pool and told her she was now a Florida retiree. Mrs. Bogart was a very wealthy woman and left money to every organization, charity, church, niece, and nephew, but none to Blackie. Now, I know, though, had Mrs. Bogart known she could have included Blackie in with her estate planning, I know she would have. This is Happy. His owner, Dr. Wilder, called me one day and told me he had cancer. He asked if I would take Happy. Again, I did not have my Lifetime Caregiver program, but out of the goodness of my heart, I took Happy. I picked Happy up and 20 days later, Dr. Wilder passed away. And so in closing, I would like to thank Blackie and her owner, Mrs. Bogart, and I'd like to thank Happy and his owner, Dr. Wilder, and I'd also like to thank you for listening to this PowerPoint presentation. And please feel free to contact me with any questions you may have.